Good morning. My name's Emily Koski, and I am the chair of the Budget Committee. I'm going to call to order our regular committee meeting for today, Tuesday, October 11th. At this time, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll to verify the presence of a quorum.
Councilmember Payne.
Present.
Wamsley.
Present.
Rainville.
Present.
Vita.
Present.
Ellison is absent. Osman is absent. Goodman is absent. President Jenkins is absent. Chavez.
Present.
Chugtai is absent. Johnson is absent. Vice President Palmisano.
Present.
Chair Koski.
Present.
There are 7 members present.
Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. Today, we will continue hearing presentations from city departments on the mayor's 2023 and 2024 recommended budgets. On the agenda today is the Civil Rights Department, Communications, and the Community Planning and Economic Development Department. Our first presentation is from the Civil Rights Department. I've allocated 45 minutes for this presentation and the corresponding Q&A. If we reach the 45-minute mark, I will give notice of a 5-minute grace period, after which we will move on to the second presentation. I'll now recognize Civil Rights Director Alberta Gillespie to give that presentation. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Koski. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad you gave us 45 minutes. We probably will need about 10. But as you said, I'm Alberta Gillespie. I am the Director of the Civil Rights Department. I have been the Director for appointed in place for approximately 5 months. And glad to be here. We'll just get started. The Civil Rights Department has been around since 1967, which is quite some time, and has evolved over that time. And so our mission, our goal is to reinforce the laws that protect and advance the civil and human rights of everyone who lives in, works in, or visits our city. And so, as I said, it's devolved. So we have our division leaders here, and I'm going to introduce them. We have the Office of Administration and Policy, Andrew Hawkins. Complaint Investigations Division, Kayla McCannon-Diera. Contract Compliance, Director Johnny Burns, who actually left and then came back. And you've been here for how many months now? 4 months, so we're right there together. Our Civil Rights and Equity Division is actually vacant, that position, so we're looking to post that actually this week. We have our Labor Standards and Enforcement Division, Director Brian Wass. And then we have our Office of Police Conduct and Review. And so Carolina Amini has actually stepped in. That position has been vacant for a little bit, and so we plan on filling that position fairly quickly here, and I'll talk a little bit about that. In my 5 months here, we have really focused a lot on outreach and connecting with communities so that they understand what we do and how that impacts and benefits them. So we've done things like lunch and learns, also for internally, so people know what the Civil Rights Department is responsible for. We've been at community events as well. And we continue to educate people on, again, what their rights happen to be. I'll go through the highlights for our various divisions. For our Office of Police Conduct and Review, some of the highlights, and we won't go through, we have a long list that we have that you can read after in our presentation. But some of the highlights for our division, I forgot to hit the slide here, are with the Office of Police Conduct Review, we've been able to minimize our intake timeline from 180 days to 30 days, which is really impressive and important. And so we want to continue that, as well as for CID, which is our Complaint and Investigation Division. We've been able to minimize those timelines as well. So where it was taking on average 500 days for an investigation to be completed, it takes now a little bit under 60. And the reason I bring that up is because that was directly the impact of adding staff to be able to bring down some of those timelines. For our Labor and Standards Division, some of the highlights is that we've been able to recoup over $550,000 for community members here. And that's really, really impressive, as well as bringing down the timelines there as well. And so we have, I think, 55, in my glasses, I should have those on, but I don't. 51 settlements in 2022, and that's more than doubled what we had in 21 and 2020. So we've seen a significant improvement there, and this was because of the addition, again, of investigators. So, and then many of you have had the opportunity to sit with Chief of Staff Andrew Hawkins, and one of the primary things that the Chief of Staff has been working on is actually making sure that our Police Conduct and Oversight Commission and our panels, that we are presenting a new model that will make it more effective and responsive to some of the concerns that were brought up in the MDHR report. So I'll get to why we are here today. We're just asking for, in terms of our change item, is we're looking for 3 FTEs in the Office of Police Conduct and Review, in our Division of Police Conduct Review. And basically, right now, the timelines that we have in that particular division are not where they need to be. Some of the things that were pointed out in the MDHR report brought that to the forefront. And so by adding staff to in those areas, we'll be able to have timelines that will decrease, much like we were able to do in CID, much like we were able to do in LSED, and then we think that are acceptable to the public. We hope to get the timeline in terms of completing an investigation from intake to actually going to the panel down to 180 days. And so we'll be able to do that with these additional FTEs, and so we'll have 2 more investigators that will add to the staff. And then we also want to increase our administrative staff because we'll be able to support the Police Conduct Commission, or what we are calling the Community Civil Oversight Commission is what we hope it to be. That'll allow us to add more support there as well with the administrative person. So that really is the only ask that we have. So that's why I said it wouldn't take 45 minutes. We want to increase the staffing in that particular area, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about the need to do so and some of the challenges we've had in that particular division, and this will help remedy some of those challenges. With that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Director. I will open it up now for questions from my colleagues to ensure that all council members have the opportunity to participate. Just like we've done in our past meetings, please just put yourself in queue to ask 1 question at a time, and then after which we'll move on to the next person in queue. So any questions from my colleagues right now? Councilmember Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I was curious around, what are some of the complexities that have been extending the investigation time in OPCR? Is it just strictly staff time, or are there other factors that we should be weighing?
So I'll speak a little bit about that. I think a lot of it is really staff time, and we have the numbers, and I don't know if Andrew will have those, but increased complaints in 2020. I think we had over 1,000 complaints in 2020, and we had a few investigators. So that's the other. And the cases themselves are very complex in terms of they might involve multiple officers, and you need to schedule an interview and do those things, conduct those interviews with officers, and we don't really have the capacity. So a lot of it is just the human capacity to conduct these investigations.
And then out of curiosity, are you getting the information you need in those investigations, or is that also a struggle?
So I think we're getting the information that we need in those investigations, and since I've come on, we've had access to other information that we didn't have before, which is really important. According to the ordinance, we can have access to the same information that MPD has, most of the information that MPD has. And we didn't necessarily have that access before, and we have increased access to the things that we need. The other thing is that we are in the process of starting a new management system through Axon, because what we have now is Practice Manager, which is very old and outdated, and so that'll also be very helpful in terms of giving us the capacity to pull information in different ways and track information. So those have an impact too on those timelines as well. So I think we're getting the access that we need at this point. There have been some challenges in terms of COVID and being able to negotiate interviewing officers in person that have had some have impact on those timelines. So, thank you, Councilmember Payne.
Thank you.
Chair Koski.
Any other questions for my colleagues? Oh, Councilmember Wansley.
Yeah, my apologies. For some reason, my computer is not working. But I wanted to ask a question regarding the Labor Standards Division. Can you share, is it just a team or staff of one, or kind of what that team consists of?
Chair Koski and Councilmember Wansley. Actually, if Director Walsh wants to come and talk about his team, I can have him do that if that's helpful. Okay.
Chair Koski, Councilmember Wansley, thank you for the question. The Labor Standards Enforcement Division has 5 FTEs currently, and as Director Gillespie mentioned, there was an addition of 1 investigator, bringing us from a total of 2 investigators to now 3, an admin and myself, and that 50% increase in investigative capacity has really made a difference in 2022.
And just, can you recount the volume, I think you mentioned, Director Gillespie, of increased volume of complaints that you all are catching? Can you share that number again?
Yeah, I should know it off the top of my head. It's 51 settlements so far. Let me double check that. I don't want to misspeak.
It's 51.
It is 51. 51 settlements thus far, and over $566,000 thus far just in 2022. And that's far and away more than any previous year.
Okay. Just wanted to get a good sense. Your department has led, I think, amazing work around wage theft, particularly, but knowing as someone who represents the university area where a lot of students are facing wage theft issues, and I know you all help with that with Blaze Pizza, more specifically, with $30,000 being recuperated for those student workers. Just also wanting to know if staff support is also helping with increased outreach as well, I think, to those areas, and if that's contributing to the increase that we're seeing in those complaints.
Yeah, Chair Koski, Councilmember Wansley, another great question. Outreach and engagement is sort of always a priority for us, and always really a challenge, frankly, just due to capacity and the busy lives that all of our residents lead, and the information coming at them from all sides. The investigators themselves, I task with really focusing on those investigations and the day-to-day tasks involved in enforcement. I try to do a lot of the outreach and engagement myself in collaboration with the Departments of Labor, U.S. Department of Labor, Minnesota Department of Labor, City of St. Paul, Duluth, and now actually been talking to Bloomington as well. So that is always important, because if workers don't know their rights, then they are less likely to complain. And if we don't receive complaints, then it's hard to know that violations are occurring, and we're not going to be able to remedy those violations. The only other sort of thing I would throw out there is that the labor market itself actually really, and this is true across all sorts of employment law, the labor market itself and the security with which, or the leverage that employees and workers have due to just labor market supply and demand also really impacts their willingness to step forward and report violations. Because of a strong labor market from the perspective of workers in 2022, that also, and we see this in anti-discrimination enforcement in all areas. When workers feel empowered, they're more likely to step forward. And I think that that's playing part of what we see in 2022.
Thank you. I will note I'm super excited to collaborate more with you all around that co-enforcement piece, especially in the university area. I mean, we just had campus workers, about 1,500 authorized strike actions because things are so in such a despairing conditions for employees there, as you named, and how that's also impacting student workers. So absolutely look forward to working with you all more around that outreach piece, so our workers on the campus know that this is a resource that they have at the city.
And Chair Koski, Councilmember Wansley, I would like to also just add, I would be remiss if I didn't note our co-enforcement and the work that we do with the worker centers is absolutely vital and critical part of our outreach and engagement. We really do rely on worker center organizers that are really out there in community at, in neighborhoods and talking directly to our most vulnerable workers about their rights.
Thank you. I just want to acknowledge that Councilmember Chugtai has joined us, and she also has a question.
Chair Koski.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to address Councilmember Wansley's question just a little bit further. We are in the process of posting for a director of equity, and so which will really be focused on how do we, with each one of our divisions, do more outreach? How do we build more of those relationships, like the core enforcement relationship? So that role is going to look very different, but it'll be focused on those very things that you bring up here, because I think that's really important. How, again, my focus, along with this team, is how do we make sure that the people that we are here to represent understand how we do that, and so that will be the focus of that position. So, thank you.
All right. Councilmember Chugtai.
Thank you, Chair Koski. Thank you for coming here today and presenting your budget to us. We all really appreciate it, and most of us are new here, so we all get a lot out of your presentation, so appreciate that. My question is also regarding the Labor Standards Enforcement Division. So Brian, just letting you know that you might have to come up in a second here. But I'm wondering if you can speak to the budget proposal for 2023 and 2024 for the Labor Standards Enforcement Division, and speak especially to the co-enforcement budget. And the things I'm looking for there are understanding how this allocation relates to investments made in the last couple of years, and how it accounts for, relates to the investment made with ARPA Round 2. I know that was a much larger investment than some of our co-enforcement partners were expecting. And the question at that time was, is this going to be a one-time thing, or are we going to continue to see this sort of investment made in co-enforcement work?
Chair Koski and Councilmember Chugtai, I'll let Director Walsh address some of those questions, but in terms of what we are bringing here today, it's really our change items are those 3 positions for OPCR. So that is where the focus is in terms of the budget for this cycle. But Director Walsh can answer the other questions about the budget for you.
Chair Koski, Councilmember Chugtai, the current allocation for 2022 is for our co-enforcement efforts is $369,000 across several worker centers. And that is slightly higher than previous years. And with the ARPA money, that allocation is likely to be maintained. It might be a little less, a little more, depending upon how you carve it up and calculate the ARPA money, and depending on which year you allocate it to. And as I mentioned before, the co-enforcement efforts, specifically around our outreach and engagement, we really couldn't, LSED really could not have achieved the results that it has achieved thus far in 2022 without that outreach and engagement, without especially the most vulnerable workers understanding what their rights are, because complaint-based enforcement really cannot function without that. Your point about one-time money is a good one, and that has been perhaps in the last 5-6 years since we started this program, maybe the biggest challenge just in the logistics of it is it's been, and I think there are discussions with everyone involved and a recognition on all sides that it is a challenge just in the planning and conducting the work. If our partners or the division is uncertain what the next year will bring for them to be able to staff up or down, et cetera, and just the time it takes to go through city bureaucracy to enter into a contract is significant in the administration, sort of on all sides of it. It takes a lot of time and energy. So the uncertainty of doing it just one-off year by year it does really interrupt our efforts. But I think everyone recognizes that.
I really appreciate that. I have a follow-up question, but I know that Chair Koski wants us to ask one question at a time, so I'll just ask, would you prefer for me to put myself back in queue?
Yeah, go ahead and put yourself back in queue, because we've got Councilmember Payne here.
Thank you.
So, okay. All right, Councilmember Payne?
I'm again, just sorry, follow up with Councilmember Chughtai's question, Chair Koski, is that we have had conversations about this being ongoing. So just to really emphasize what Director Walsh said and for the co-enforcement funding. And so hopefully that is, we know it's not going to happen during this cycle, but it's something we're looking at during the next budget cycle. So we've been in conversations with all of our partners about what that really should look like. And the other thing I just want to mention, since we're talking about ARPA funding, is that we also have funding to do more compliance work in a special project that will help small businesses, so that we're excited about.
All right, Councilmember Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am remembering that Civil Rights was evaluating a few different softwares packages for managing the SUBP program. And I think at that time, the department didn't move forward with that contract. I'm just curious, are dollars already allocated for that type of investment, or is that something that would actually require a change request?
To my knowledge, I don't think dollars are allocated. I'll double check with Andrew on that. And then I'll actually have Director Burns come and talk about some of the changes he just made using the current software that we have.
Good morning, Chair Koski, Councilmember Payne. It's been about 10 years since I've been up here in front of the council, so it's interesting.
Welcome.
Thank you. All new faces too. So we have a current software package, the B2G Now system. It's a database that's being used across the country in some of the stops that I've made over my career. It's there, and it's a very useful system. Tracks all of our project information, SUBP information, goals. What we did recently was put forward a forward-facing compliance kind of transparency measure for the public to actually go in and search our contracts if they had questions, or if a small business had questions. Where is the project as of the last payment made from the city to the contractor? They can actually go to our portal. You don't need login access and see where any project is. Or if you have a question about a specific contractor and what their history is, you can look every single project they have and see what their participation is and their utilization of MBEs and WBs are on the contract. So I thought that the director thought that it would be a great idea that we put that out there. It's transparent, everybody can see it, and it stops the questions of who's providing and who's doing and what are you doing, because anyone can see it. So the system that we're using now is pretty it's pretty well used, and it's a good system. I don't know about the systems that were being looked at. I've been involved with this work for a long time, so I'm pretty well versed on most of the databases that are out there that track small business, workforce, that kind of stuff.
No, actually, the fact that you brought up B2G Now answers my question exactly, because it was one of the systems under consideration at that time. So that means that that decision was made and you're using it. So
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now we have Councilmember Chugtai.
Thank you. So following up on the conversation we were just having about labor standards enforcement, am I understanding correctly, just looking at the budget allocation for labor standards enforcement, that just under, for 2023 and 2024, the allocation for co-enforcement is just under 200,000, so 193. Is that,
That's correct.
is that the right section of the budget?
Chair Koski, Councilmember Chotai, I don't think that figure includes all of the ARPA funding.
Great.
So, and the ARPA funding, of course, was allocated this year, must be spent by the end of 2024. So depending upon which year you assign it to, but no, that funding is not including the ARPA funding.
That was going to be my next question. So the just about 200 that's allocated in the budget for 23 and 24, that the intention is to supplement that with ARPA funding to continue services at the same level of about that 369?
Correct, yeah. Chair Koski, Councilmember Chotai, that is correct. It's actually, I believe, 169,000 in the mayor's recommended budget for co-enforcement in 2023. And when you add the ARPA money into that, it will be right around the same level of 369,000.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. I'm not seeing any further questions from my colleagues, so thank you so much, and thank you to the team for being here. It's really nice to put a face with the name and see you in person as well, so I appreciate you all joining today.
Thank you, Chair Koski and council members.
Thank you. All right, our second presentation today is from Communications. I've also allocated up to 45 minutes for this presentation and Q&A. I'll invite Interim Engagement Deputy Greta Bergstrom to give that presentation. Welcome.
Good morning, Chair Koski, council members. My name is Greta Bergstrom, and I am serving as the Interim Engagement Deputy in the Office of City Coordinator. I am here today with Interim Communications Director Rose Lindsay and our Video Services Manager, CJ Harrison. I'm here in my role, obviously managing departments that are charged with public messaging. Those include the Communications Department, Neighborhood and Community Relations, and 311 and the Service Center. Interim Director Rose Lindsay will be walking through Mayor Fry's recommended 2023-24 budget this morning. Thank you for having us.
Good morning. As Greta said, my name is Rose Lindsay, and I'm serving as the Interim Communications Director. I'm also the Deputy Director for the city, and I have had the honor of serving the city for almost 10 years in different roles, and I'm very pleased to be here with all of you this morning. We're going to begin with going over our organization of the Communications Department. We are a small but mighty department. We've had 14 FTEs pretty consistently over the last few years. I will be outlining in our mayor recommended budget a change of 2 positions. So we see here 14 FTEs, but currently we do have the Director of Public Information, Public Safety, and a Media Relations position that will be moving out of the Communications Department into the new Office of Community Safety. And one of those positions are currently vacant. It is the Director of Public Information, Public Safety, and currently the Commissioner and his team are working on refilling that position. And then, of course, with myself being detailed into the Communications Director position, it's not a vacancy, but we do have our Deputy Director position open because of having those 2 positions at the same time. And I'll be going into more detail in our presentation and our change items, our new interagency coordinator position and a video specialist position. As we just mentioned, our staffing has stayed the same pretty much over the last few years, and we currently, the only vacancy we have is moving over to the Office of Community Safety, and so it will be filled by the Commissioner and his team at this point in time. I did want to provide an update on our ARPA funding before I go into our recommended budget and our change items. In 2021, we did have a one-time allocation of $50,000. This allowed for us to get temporary video specialists to help broadcast meetings during COVID and the pandemic. We required a lot more video staff to produce all of the meetings, and we're very proud that we produced over 301 government meetings in 2021, and as of October 5th, we were on track to do 185 government meetings. Later on, we'll be talking about that new video specialist that will help us continue with this great work. Our second ARPA funding was $50,000 this year in 2022 to reach out and create deeper relationships with East African community media. We have a really great cultural media programming, but we realized we weren't reaching all of our members of the East African community, and so this one-time funding helped us issue an RFP where we are very happy to say we got 9 proposals in of East African community media here. We issued a Zoom meeting in partnership with Neighborhood and Community Relations in multiple languages to make sure that our vendors were able to truly understand that RFP process, because sometimes at the city that can be complicated to issue proposals and respond, and we wanted to make sure everybody had an opportunity to do that if they wanted. As I mentioned, we had 9 proposals, we had an internal panel review, and we are currently in process of awarding funding, and we're hoping to begin yet this year and then carry some of that work over into next year. And so these folks will really help us take city programs, information, news, and get it out deeper into community in trusted channels, in trusted messengers, in the way folks want to receive news and information for folks who aren't necessarily subscribing to city social media or electronic newsletters or reading mainstream publications and getting the word out through media relations and press releases that way. So that's an update on our 2 ARPA activities. So communications, our goal, of course, is to get information out timely, accessible to the folks who live, work, and play here in Minneapolis so they can better understand, appreciate, benefit, and participate in the city programs and initiatives. Our goals are that residents, businesses, and visitors have timely, equitable access to information, that the media organizations also have the timely, equitable access to the city news and information, that city departments, we're an internal service department, so that city departments and divisions also are receiving timely, equitable access to strategic communication services and access to city channels to get their programs and informations out to residents and community. And then we, of course, serve our workforce as well by making sure that they get news and information about their employer. And before I move on here, I'll just note that our budget, you'll see a slight increase from 2022 to 23 and 24. And truly, this is just small updates in salaries, our own rent, IT, things like that, standard costs of doing business. And then we do have one change item that we'll be talking about. That's an increase in our cultural media programming. So we are divided into 2 service areas, our enterprise communications, which I'll go through in a little bit detail here, and then we also do public access television. So our enterprise communications encompasses pretty much all of the things we do, including media relations, digital communications and social media, multimedia and video productions, the area that CJ manages. And we're very proud to say in media relations that not only do we work to proactively get our news and information out there to train department leaders on how to interact with the media, but we also receive in all of the media inquiries. And as you can imagine, the last couple years, that volume has increased quite a bit. And so some numbers from the last year, we had over 180 news releases and advisories that went out. We did over 24 press conferences. We handled over 1,700 media inquiries, and that does not include MPD or fire. So that's just on all the other city departments. In our digital area, we work with all the other departments to do any paid social campaigns. So we had over $27,000 in social media ads, gaining 3 million ad impressions last year. We have 430,000 followers on our social media channels, And our social media individual is not only doing an amazing job here in Minneapolis, but he is nationally recognized as a leader in social media and received an award, a leadership award last year that we are very pleased with. He also manages the social media policy and makes sure that we're following all the data practices that we need to do as a government entity. As I mentioned earlier, we broadcast 301 government meetings last year. We do that with caption services, make sure that they're on YouTube, so not only can you get them live, but if you want to go back and watch them later, that they're available, making sure this is accessible for the community. We also do a number of video production services in multiple languages, and so you can see that we have done over 97 video productions, and 11 of those were in Hmong, Somali, and Spanish, and we continue to get requests to do those in other languages. And then we also help our departments to make sure not only do we produce the video, but how do we get it out there further in community, because we're not always expecting folks to come to our YouTube channel to find a video in Somali or Hmong, but how do we really get it out there further? And then additionally, we support the new office building, the conference center, which is not only for our departments, but for the community to use. And in this year alone, we've had 126 reservations that we've helped support. Continuing on with services that we provide, I've mentioned our cultural media programming, and I'll go into that deeper because we have a change item there. But just this last year alone, we did 103 programs in 4 languages through partner radio stations. And again, I'll dive into this a little bit deeper. But I will note that, for example, you were asking our civil rights team how they get messages out about sick and safe time and wage theft. An example is we would partner with them. We would get them on cultural radio programming so we could have the messages out in Hmong, Somali, Spanish, and then clients could call, or residents could call in real time and ask questions and really get that clarification. So this offers a two-way engagement that's also really safe if folks don't want to identify who they are when they're asking the question. It's just a really good way to not only provide information, but get the questions from the community and just answer them in real time. So this is a program we're very proud of, and it's a partnership with Neighborhood and Community Relations. So we do all the production, and then NCR does the actual hosting of the programs in language. We also manage all of our internal communications, and so if you're familiar with Minneapolis Matters, that's our in-house newsletter. We did 37 of those between 2021 and 2022. In addition, when COVID began, we did a special issue that just had all of our policy information in it and updates for staff. As the environment continued to be fluid and changed, we had our COVID information in there, 34 issues. And then we sent 32 all-employee emails with everything from updates on how to prepare for a trial, or maybe if there was just employee benefits to go out there, really just making sure employees have the information that they need. And it's important to us that they hear about things from their employer before they hear about things out in the news. A few other things we've done is make sure we have internal resource pages on, again, COVID, or about 40% of our workforce had the opportunity to do some sort of hybrid work during the pandemic. So as we return more and more to the physical workplace, having resources for employees, and our department works with HR, IT, finance, others to make sure that information is available. We also work to support departments with visual identity, graphic design, maintain the city's brand identity. Did over 160 projects last year, including many COVID projects. Something that I'm very excited we're about to launch in a few weeks here is a digital software called Canva for Teams. And this is something that many of our employees are already using, but we're going to create an enterprise account where department folks can request a license through IT, and we'll have a brand kit in there, so all of our city logos and colors, templates. And so if folks are requesting to do a flyer or a postcard, we have one designer for the whole city. This will allow departments to actually create some of those basic designs by themselves, but with the city brand tools. And so we've been working on this with IT for the last year. The environment's almost finished, and we'll be launching it just here in a few weeks. So even your council staff can use this too if you have initiatives. Very excited to get this launched soon. A few other achievements of our team this last year is we stood up a joint information system proactively during COVID to get news and information out to our community very quickly, working with the health department as incident command. And then also during former Officer Chauvin, we stood up a joint information system there too to get news and information out very quickly to the public when they had questions going on, that we could get that public safety information out there. Had over 50 communication engagement partners everywhere from Red Cross to Hennepin County to St. Paul, Metro Transit, all of us working together to make sure we were coordinated in our messaging. Additionally, we worked with the audit department to complete internal enterprise communication spend. This was a recommendation from our 2019 360 audit by Padilla. And so we were able to get that done to really get an understanding of what kind of communication spend is taking place outside of the communications department. So I'll move into our 3 change items. I've mentioned our cultural media programming several times already now. So this again began in 2016 as one Spanish radio program. We piloted that for a year in partnership with Neighborhood and Community Relations. It was very successful, and we have now been able to grow this work to do 103 programs last year. The mayor is recommending increasing this from $50,000 to $100,000. That investment will allow us to take our existing contracts and partners and actually pay cost of living increases. We haven't been able to pay those increases for 5 years, and we all know that expenses have gone up, and so this will allow us to pay for those increases. It will also allow us to explore more partners. We recognize we're not reaching all of the communities, and so we do want to, just like the East African community proposal, that is a one-time funding. We might develop some wonderful relationships we want to continue, so this ongoing funding will help us do that. And then when emergencies happen, unfortunately, when they happened, we didn't necessarily have the funding in communications to expand and contract our shows. And so we had to be resourceful, make partnerships to make that happen. If we have the funding in our budget, we can just do that immediately. And so if something happens, we can work with our partners and just expand those contracts and have the information available immediately. And so all of this, of course, leads to more information in a culturally relevant manner for our residents. And so this is our first change item that I'm very excited about. Our second change item is a position. This is a new FTE for us. It's an interagency coordinator. A lot of departments have this. We are excited to be exploring this. Most of our staff works on several things, so they might be doing media relations. They might also be managing a city-owned channel, and then if a crisis comes up, they're pulled away in that direction as well. This position will be dedicated to helping us really focus on some of those reports that I mentioned. So for example, we had that 2019 Padilla audit. We just did the financial audit. We had the after-action review, and so this individual will really help us focus on some of those findings and look for ways that we as a communications department can better offer communications across the enterprise with other departments. So whether that means new processes or procedures, better tracking our metrics and outcomes, but really how can we use the resources we have to better service the enterprise and then ultimately our residents from that. Additionally, most of our team received FEMA training several years ago, and that is now expired. And so ensuring that we are NIMS compliant, we want to have this individual help us track that because there's quite a bit of training for our communications department to stand up the joint information system. So this individual will also help us in that area. Again, ultimately, if we are more efficient and trained and able to track our outcomes, this will help us serve the departments better and serve the community better. And then finally, I had mentioned up top, we were very lucky to get some ARPA funding to have 2 video specialists to help us support having meetings, broadcasting meetings throughout the last year, but continuing to do 300 plus meetings with our 1 video specialist is not sustainable. So this change item with the video specialist will allow us to have a second FTE to continue to broadcast meetings. If that one individual were to be ill or on vacation, we don't really have a backup in place. And so this is just really deepening our bench and also looking at potential expansion of covering even more meetings for more transparency, more access, and ultimately, serving our residents better. And then our second program area is public access television. And so the city receives funding from the public education and government fees from the cable companies that comes to the city. And then the communications department contracts with an independent vendor. We work with Be Fresh, doing business as Speak Minneapolis. And Speak Minneapolis is a diverse, multi-generational team that offers broadcast, media training, journalism. And what they really do is make cable access available in a community resource, lifting up our local voices, offering training, offering the cable access, and really completing our vision that's here on the slide. Multimedia approach, offering the training, creating additional opportunities, and really providing a place to do hyper-local stories that represent our community. Some outcomes I'd love to share with you is that in the time that they've been able to take this contract, get up to speed, they currently have 69 members who are broadcasting their work on our cable access and telling local stories. They're continuing to train more members. And this just really is a service that we're very excited about. I'll be very clear that the city doesn't have any involvement in determining who the members are or what the programming is. So the money comes through the communications department and goes to this vendor to provide these services. And that does conclude our presentation, and I will be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Director. Appreciate that. I am just looking into the queue here. I see, first of all, I want to acknowledge that Councilmember Goodman has arrived, and then I see I have Councilmember Wansley in queue.
Yep. I just had a quick, before my actual question, and clarification. For the cultural media programming, it said 0 FTEs. Again, can you share if that work is happening through an existing staff member? I just saw that part. Yeah.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Councilmember, thank you for that question. This is really a collaboration between communications and neighborhood and community relations. Okay. And so the money does pass straight through to the vendors. And so when we really don't think of them as vendors, we think of them as true partners, and they really showed up in these last few years as partners. So it is a few staff from the communications department that really manages the contracts, provides script writing, books the guests, does all of that kind of production work. And then neighborhood and community relations provides the on-talent host. So their cultural specialists are the hosts. They also work with us to get interpreting services in case the guest is not able to provide the information in language. That's always our preference in language, but if not, we will get an interpreter. And then the actual media vendor will do the on-air production, right? Whether it's a radio or YouTube TV, they'll do that production. But there's no FTE dedicated to running the program.
That's good. I just wanted that quick clarification. My actual question was around having access to a platform more accessible, and not, you talk a lot about accessibility to the public through some of our communication channels. I'm more so speaking about Teams. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not about to sit up here in front. Teams is not, I am not Teams at all. And especially with doing a lot of external engagement, Teams make it challenging to do a lot of community discussions with our residents. It can crash. It's just man. So I know my office has been in touch with our comms department and wanted to see if there's any way in 2023 or even in 2024 where we're looking at other type of platforms that could support that, or that might even could be linked to some of the work that I know Councilmember Goodman is heading up with our clerk's office around constituent engagement, just how our communications platforms are also supporting our efforts to meet constituent services through those type of meetings that we do, public forums and those things.
Yeah. Madam Chair, Councilmember, thank you for the question. Manager Harrison, I don't know if you have additional information on the broadcasting of the meetings.
CJ Harrison, Communications, Councilman Koski. Sorry about that, Councilman Wansley. This would be a request from IT. We just, basically IT picked the platform, we kind of made it as best as possible. Yep.
All right, we have Councilmember Vita.
Not a question, a compliment. I just want to thank you. Since you all are here, I want to thank the entire department on behalf of my Aunt Rose, who lives in Arizona, who gets to watch the meetings. She loves it. She goes to the library and she shows all of her friends in Winslow, Arizona, all of the meetings. So keep up the good work. She told me a couple weeks ago to thank all of you for great broadcasting. She gets to keep up with what's going on in Minneapolis in real time. So thank you all so much.
Madam Chair, Councilmember, thank you. Fortunately, we have some of our team listening behind the scenes right now. So hopefully they heard that directly, but we'll be sure to pass that on as well.
All right, any other questions from my colleagues? Not seeing any. Thank you so much for this presentation. Thank you for all of your hard work and dedication to get the information out to us within the enterprise, but also to our community members. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, our final presentation today is from the Community Planning and Economic Development Department, better known as CPED. We have 1 hour allocated for this presentation. Our CPED Director, Andrea Brennan, will be giving that presentation. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Apologize for a minute, I'm just catching my breath. I ran, you all are running a little ahead of schedule, so I ran over here in my heels. So I'm Andrea Brennan, Director of Community Planning and Economic Development Department, which is commonly referred to as CPED. I'm pleased to present Mayor Fry's proposed first biannual 2023-24 budget for CPED. To provide more context for CPED's budget and activities, my presentation will describe each of the program areas in CPED and highlight key metrics and performance results, as well as change item allocation requests in each program area. Note that this is not a comprehensive report on all of CPED's work and outcomes in the last year. That report would be much longer. Before getting started, I would like to thank some folks who are not here, some folks who are. First, I wanted to thank Karuna Mahajan. She is CPED's Operation and Innovation Director, and she is responsible really for carrying the significant load of the CPED budget throughout the process and working with our budget and finance team and the mayor's office and others. So really appreciate the work that of Karuna. Also wanted to thank the CPED directors, managers, and dedicated team members who bring commitment to our mission, creativity, and resolve every day to improve the lives of Minneapolis residents. Here with me today are the CPED Division Directors, Eric Hansen, Director of Economic Policy and Development, and I will introduce the others if I can pause when they come in. But Elfric Port, Director of Housing Policy and Development, Steve Poor, Director of Development and Services, and our new Planning Director, Meg McMahon, is starting today. I also wanted to just acknowledge the team members from Construction Code Services who are also in the room today, and just acknowledge the incredible work that they do for Minneapolis residents and businesses every day. The Mayor's 2023 recommended budget for CPED is approximately $125 million, including $21 million in proposed change item allocations for multiple initiatives and programs. Many allocations are one-time allocations. The 2024 recommended budget is $120 million. The 2023 base budget of $104.5 million in expenditures represents no change from the 2022 budget. The increase in 2 FTEs in 2023 reflects the addition of the Promise Zone Director, which you'll hear about soon, and the Planning Director positions on the CPED team. The additional FTEs in 2024 that are proposed are 5 of the 6 positions that were frozen during the 2020 budget cuts and are currently funded with the American Rescue Plan Act dollars through 2023. This slide includes the allocations by each program area. 9.4 million for administration and support, 11.4 million for development services, 28.7 million for economic policy and development, 44.8 million for housing policy and development, 5.3 million for planning, and 25.3 million for transfers and debt service, for a total of $124.9 million. I will go through each program proposal and change items in detail in subsequent slides. As of the end of last month, CPED has 23 vacant positions, which is 9.7% of the total CPED staff. All of these positions are in the process of getting filled. The administration and support team is led by Karuna Mahajan. Last year, a new policy, research, and outreach team called the PRO team was created to coordinate policy, research, and data analysis functions across CPED divisions and with other other city departments. This new team is part of a broader strategy to integrate disciplines, create efficiencies, increase capacity to implement Minneapolis 2040, Strategic Racial Equity Action Plan, and other city policies, and expand opportunities for public engagement with this work. There is one proposed change item request for the Administration and Support Division. $157,000 of ongoing funding is requested for the license fees that is needed for our new Salesforce application. This application is being developed to replace the current and aging Housing, Business Finance, and Land Asset Management and Workflow System, otherwise known as MINS. This new Salesforce business application will support CPED's housing and economic development program implementation and financial management goals through automation, data collection, demographic and geographic tracking, and reporting. Development Services, led by Steve Poor, is CPED's largest division. It includes construction code services and development review teams. This division is responsible for ensuring a quality built environment throughout the city through implementation of Minneapolis 2040 plan and related policies and all permitting and inspections for development projects to ensure compliance with current building code. Our construction code services coordinates with property owners and contractors to ensure the comprehensive application of the Minnesota State Building Code and applicable city ordinances. CCS consists of the 3 business lines of construction plan review, construction inspections, and programs. Construction inspections performs all required inspections for building, mechanical, and plumbing work covered by issued permits and responds to complaints regarding construction projects. Programs include code compliance, truth in sale housing, certificate of occupancy, and fire escrow. The development review team collaborates with the public service area to serve as the front door to the city's consolidated development activities. With a customer service first mission, this program ensures high quality development while requiring that building construction and rehabilitation projects meet the city standard in terms of safety, livability, health, and environmental sensitivity. The chart on the left shows permits issued from 2016 through year to date of 2022. 36,000 permits were issued in 2021. 2022 is expected to exceed both 2021 and 2020 permits issued by about 10 to 20%. The chart on the right shows the total construction value of permits issued. In 2021, the total value of permits issued was just over $1.6 billion. We were already close to that by the end of the third quarter of 2022. We expect to approach $2 billion in value by the end of the year. Also currently in development services, but will be moving to the newly created art department, is art in public places. This program integrates projects into the city planning, services, design, and infrastructure to support cultural identity, inspire ideas about the future of the city, and develop the capacity of artists and residents to shape city spaces and neighborhoods. In 2021, 24 commissions were underway for a total of 31 artists under contract. 58% of these artists are Black, Indigenous, people of color artists, and 74% of these artists are locally based. Most of these commissions were for the new public service building, resulting in a much higher than average number of commissions in 2021. In 2022, 10 new commissions are underway for a total of 10 artists under contract. 70 of these artists are Black, Indigenous, people of color artists, and 100% of them are local artists. The Economic Policy and Development Division is led by Eric Hansen and includes 4 subdivisions: small business team, business development, business licensing, and employment and training team. In 2023, the Promise Zone team will officially join this division as its 5th subdivision. The information depicted on this slide show the outputs from CPED in support of small business, commercial real estate, and business district supports. In total, the small business team and business development assisted hundreds of businesses and dozens of community-based organizations. The small business team has helped more than 600 businesses and entrepreneurs connect to resources, navigate the city, or receive one-on-one technical assistance. Business development has awarded or closed on 21 commercial property development fund loans totaling $11.3 million in direct investment. The Commercial Property Development Fund has an uncommitted balance currently of $7.9 million with a pipeline of more than 40 possible projects. Business development has also awarded almost $900,000 into the Great Streets program to support either facade grants to small businesses or business direct supports. Keeping with our strategic racial equity action plan goals of growing and sustaining BIPOC-owned businesses, the program's rate of service to BIPOC-owned businesses is 80%. The division's employment and training team helps to prepare people for living wage careers. Through adult and youth workforce development programs, Minneapolis residents find and retain jobs or pursue training that will lead to employment. Our network of community-based agencies works with high-barrier employment seekers with career counseling, job readiness training, job search assistance, and job placement. As shown on the first 2 graphs, we trained 643 adults and helped place 833 people into employment last year. As of the end of the 3rd quarter of 2022, there are 600 training graduates and 300 job placements. Program participants receive higher wage after participating in our adult programs. The data in the 3rd graph show wage increases exceeding 40% in the past 2 years. Wages and participation numbers will fluctuate from year to year as providers respond to market and job seeker needs. Our youth programs aim to create a strong, talented, and diverse future workforce through the Step Up program and the year-round Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA, youth program. Young people between the ages of 14 and 21 receive supports to reduce youth unemployment now and prepare them for careers as adults. Data on this slide depict participation in the Step Up program. This past summer was the first post-COVID-19 impacted summer. We returned to internships with over 1,100 young people participating. Summers of 2020 and 2021 and 2022 represent the combined totals of in-person, hybrid, and remote internships and online career learning graduates. Undoing generations of social and economic inequalities is at the heart of the Step Up strategy. Deliberate and intentional outreach and recruitment occurs from underrepresented communities. In a typical summer, more than 3 out of 4 Step Up participants are youth of color, with 86% of youth of color participating this past summer. Moving on to proposed change items for economic development and policy. The first proposed change item is the extension of a pilot program that was first funded through the American Rescue Plan. Strategies for Community Safety is a competitive program for community-based organizations to increase street safety patrols and general safety training. In the first round of contracts, the city awarded grants to the Cedar Riverside Community Council and the Northside Residents Redevelopment Council, or NERC. Cedar Riverside Community Council is using its grant to fund crisis intervention training, on-street resource ambassadors, and security guard certification courses. Northside Resident Redevelopment Council's grant is funding training and wages for community safety specialists, a registered apprenticeship program with SEIU, which increase on-street presence of people trained in de-escalation, proactive intervention, and general community engagement on the north side. This is a one-time funding request of $1 million to continue the pilot for a second year. If funded, the Promise Zone team will issue a new notice of funding availability in 2021. The second proposed change item is a one-time allocation for the Commercial Property Development Fund. As noted earlier, demand for this program remains strong. This request is for an additional $2 million of one-time funding to support approximately 3 to 4 projects in the pipeline. Commercial Property Development Fund receives annual ongoing funding of $500,000 a year. To date, Commercial Property Development Fund awards are in 8 of the city's 13 wards in the first 2 years of implementation. The third proposed change item is to support Dreamland on 38th. Dreamland is a multi-floor, multi-use, small business and event center at the corner of 38th Street and 3rd Avenue South. The proposed one-time funding request of $500,000 will support this $8 million development project by providing early seed money and support for the Cultural Wellness Center to complete its capital campaign. To date, they've raised $1 million with funding commitments from Hennepin County, and they have a funding request into the state of Minnesota for the Main Street program. The fourth proposed change item supports cultural malls economically impacted by COVID-19. The one-time $400,000 request will provide funding for competitive grants for mall operators who can show financial impacts that were caused by COVID-19, but were not addressed through any other COVID-19 relief program. Cultural malls will also be able to propose using grants to make systems improvements to better prepare for future airborne viruses or other public health improvements to their spaces. Staff would develop program guidelines for City Council approval and issue a notice of funding availability in 2023. The fifth proposed change item is support for Zara Small Business Incubator Expansion Project. Zara is the Black, woman-owned, multi-tenant small business incubator located at 1200 West Broadway. Operated by the Black Women's Wealth Alliance, Zara offers 11 commercial suites for small businesses, primarily in the health and wellness space, a commercial kitchen, sit-down restaurant, and event space. The one-time $1 million funding request supports the $8.8 million stabilization and expansion of the center that will double the space available for small businesses, primarily run by Black women. Expansion construction is expected in late 2023. The sixth proposed change item in this division is support for the Rise Up Center with $250,000 of one-time funding. This center is a proposed 70,000 square foot, geographically accessible, culturally competent, and economically sustainable hub for BIPOC workforce development in the green, building, and clean energy fields. The center is a project by Tending the Soil, a coalition of Minnesota people of color-led organizations working to organize working-class communities of color and provide workforce development to increase BIPOC workers in union apprenticeship programs. The center would focus on apprenticeship programs in carpentry, community safety, high-rise window cleaning, and other opportunities. The city funding will support pre-development expenses for the $1.9 million pre-development budget. The full center development has an estimated cost of around $30 million. Fundraising for this phase will begin in 2023, and it plans to secure a site for the center in late 2023 or early 2024. The organizations involved in this coalition are looking at several sites along the Lake Street corridor for this use. The last change item for this division is in support of its newest member. As I shared earlier, the Minneapolis Promise Zone staff will move from the city coordinator's office into CPED fully in 2023. This move better aligns the Promise Zone's work to build an inclusive economy, improve health and safety, and promote stable housing on the north side with the city's larger economic development resources. The $36,000 funding request provides ongoing support for the cost of the lease agreement on West Broadway for the Promise Zone staff. The city has always paid for this lease since the inception of the Promise Zone in 2017. However, the costs are proposed to shift from the coordinator's office budget to CPED. Moving on to housing policy and development, this division is led by Alfred Port. Thanks. If you haven't already, and we will send out a link to all of the council members, but the Way Home report, which is the progress report on the 7-point housing strategy of the city of Minneapolis, is now available, and would encourage everyone to take a look at that. It's a very robust report that highlights the success that has been achieved in the housing area in the last 3 years. Let's see. So some of this is a very, very brief little snippet of information that is available in the Way Home report, but I think it's important to go through here to demonstrate the increase in affordable housing production that has happened in recent years. So this program helps Minneapolis residents secure decent, safe, and affordable rental housing. And it's important to note that we prioritize projects with the deepest affordability and those that serve large families. The 2019-2021 progress report highlights historic record levels of affordable housing production and preservation. The first bar on this chart shows average annual production. So this is new production. This does not include the preservation activity. This is production of new affordable housing units. So that first bar chart of 330 units shows 2011 to 2018 average annual production of 330 units. You can see the different colors on those bar charts. So the blue represents housing units that are affordable to households with incomes at or below 30% of area median income. The green shows units affordable to households with incomes between 31% and 50% of area median income, and the orange is affordable at or below 60% of area median income. The middle bar shows the Metropolitan Council's production goal for the city of Minneapolis. So the Met Council has established a goal for the city of Minneapolis of developing 349 new units on an annual basis. And for the first time in 2020, the Met Council, or 2021, the Met Council has delineated that goal as a percentage of area median income. So you can see they've set specific goals for the city of developing 155 units, for example, affordable households that are below 30% of area median income. The third bar, the one on the right, shows the average annual production number of 633 units that closed, and this is again on an annual basis between 2019 and 2021. As shown, the city has significantly surpassed the Met Council's goal. This is really attributable to the mayor's and the council's continued commitment to affordable housing and funding affordable housing activity in our city. The other thing I just want to point out here is that you can see that while the overall number of affordable housing production has about just under doubled, the production affordable at 30% of area median income has increased by a factor of 5. This production trend is projected to continue in 2022 and 2023. We awarded $15.7 million. You awarded $15.7 million to produce or preserve 797 new affordable units in 2021. Of these 797 units, 291 of them, 36% of them, are affordable to households with incomes at or below 30% of area median income, including 152 units specifically set aside for people experiencing homelessness. The city of Minneapolis is a national leader in the preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing, referred to as NOAA. Since we launched our first NOAA preservation program in 2018, we have preserved more than 2,400 NOAA units. That's more than 15% of the NOAA inventory identified back in 2017 when we launched the programs. Recent changes in the NOAA preservation program have resulted in the majority of recent program participants being emerging BIPOC developers. Also wanted to mention the supporting renters is a city priority and a critical part of our housing strategy. Legal services and other supports provided by Homeline, Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid, and Volunteer Lawyers Network have assisted thousands of Minneapolis residents, renters throughout the city in all 13 wards, resulting in more than 800 evictions prevented and more than $1.2 million of recovered damaged deposits and rent abatements. These services are provided in English, Spanish, Somali, and Hmong. Not on this slide, but important to mention is the continued housing stability work of the Stable Homes, Stable Schools program. This is a partnership with Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, Minneapolis Public Schools, Hennepin County, Polad Family Foundation, and YMCA of the Greater Twin Cities. Launched in April 2019, this program provides housing stability to families with elementary school-aged children in Minneapolis Public Schools who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of experiencing homelessness. As of the end of 2021, over 3,000 children in 1,100 families have been served through the Stable Homes, Stable Schools program. The Homeownership Development and Support Program helps Minneapolis residents buy, build, and/or rehabilitate affordable ownership homes. City programs support access to home ownership through education and down payment assistance, developing new homeownership units, and sustaining homeownership through home improvement loans. The programs center low-income and BIPOC communities in their program design to provide opportunities for intergenerational wealth building and decrease racial disparities in homeownership. All programs were updated in 2020, 2021 to make homeownership possible and sustainable for households between 30% of the area median income and 80%. And to encourage increased density for the development of city land. Over half of the developers and organizations active in our homeownership programs are BIPOC-led organizations and developers. The chart here shows who's benefiting from our programs by race and ethnicity. The significant increase when comparing 2019 to 2020 and 2021 is because we expanded homeowner counseling services in 2020 and 2021 with using one-time housing stabilization funding from COVID-19 grants in the amount of $3.3 million. This included direct payments to households facing foreclosure, extensive foreclosure prevention, and homebuyer readiness counseling. Of note, during the same period, the rate of service to BIPOC households increased from 70% to 79%. The first proposed change item for housing is a one-time funding request for $2.7 million to support critical maintenance needs across affordable rental housing owned and operated by Minneapolis Public Housing Authority. Beginning last year, the city's budget includes $1 million of ongoing funding for MPHA. This proposed one-time change will increase funding to $3.7 million for 2023. MPHA is in the process of updating its strategic plan. Funding for 2023 will be used to address the priorities identified in that strategic plan. It is important to note here also that the city has contributed significant funding in the last year to MPHA that is outside of the regular budget process. The city approved $5.8 million in a combination of American Rescue Plan Act funds and the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to support an 84-unit scattered site family deeply affordable rebuild project. And this is for families in neighborhoods throughout the city, as well as more than $1 million to support fire suppression systems in high-rise buildings. The second proposed change item for housing is a one-time $9.8 million request in both 2023 and 2024. Combined with the program's base budget amount of $8.1 million, this will result in an $18 million Affordable Housing Trust Fund budget for each year in 2023 and 2024. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund provides gap financing to produce and preserve affordable rental housing. gap funds are used in combination with federal low-income housing tax credits, housing revenue bonds, tax increment financing, state and county and other public and private investment to produce and preserve affordable housing. The proposed $18 million for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is sized to ensure that we can continue the level of new production that I showed earlier, that exceeds the Met Council production goals, and especially ensures the production of new deeply affordable units and also the preservation of deeply affordable and federally subsidized units. The third proposed change item request for housing is $25,000 of additional ongoing funding to increase the city's support of to the Minneapolis Hennepin County Office to End Homelessness. Currently, the city contributes $50,000 annually to support the city county Office to End Homelessness. The proposed increase of $25,000 for a total of $75,000 will be used to support the Lived Experience Advisory Group This is a 10 to 15 member committee that informs funding decisions and systems planning for activities such as street outreach, shelter, and permanent housing for people experiencing homelessness. The Minneapolis-Hennepin County Office to End Homelessness is responsible for developing the city-county strategy to end and prevent homelessness. The mayor co-chairs, along with Hennepin County Commissioner Conley, the executive committee of the Continuum of Care Partnership to End Homelessness called Heading Home Hennepin. Councilmembers Chavez and Councilmember Osman are also members of this committee. The fourth proposed change item for housing is a one-time funding request for Minneapolis homes in both 2023 and 2024. In 2023, the request is to allocate $508,000, and for 2024, it is to allocate $2 million. The Minneapolis Homes Program provides affordability and development gap assistance for the development of affordable and perpetually affordable ownership units. These investments will bring the program budget to $4.5 million total, with the base budget, additional federal funds that are already programmed for 2023, and this budget request for both 2023 and 24, again, will bring the Minneapolis Homes budget to $4.5 million in each of these budget years. CPED continues to be successful in leveraging the city's investment to secure state funding. In the past several years, the state has allocated about $1.5 million a year to further support the Minneapolis Homes activity. More than 70% of the households served through this program are Black, Indigenous, people of color households, and half of the developers that participate in the Minneapolis Homes program are BIPOC-led. The fifth proposed change item request for housing is a one-time funding request of $1.5 million for the NOAA Preservation Program. This program provides funding for preservation buyers to acquire and preserve approximately 55 to 75 naturally occurring affordable housing units in a post-pandemic housing market. The sixth proposed change item for housing is to redirect the $494,000 of federal community development block grant funding, CDBG funding, that is currently budgeted in the higher density housing corridor program to the Homeownership Opportunity Minneapolis, or HOME program. The HOME program provides $10,000 in down payment assistance and closing cost assistance to households with incomes at or below 80% of the area median income. HOME has an ongoing budget of $196,000, and this additional funding will serve approximately 60 households and will help bridge the homeownership gap between white and BIPOC households in Minneapolis. This is a budget-neutral request. The Higher Density Housing Corridor Program has been successful in helping to acquire and assemble multifamily sites for affordable housing. However, due to continued need to focus capacity on recovery programs and investments, we've not had the staff capacity to dedicate to this program in the last few years, so we do not need new funding in this program for 2023 and 2024. The seventh proposed change item for funding is $500,000 of ongoing funding starting in 2024 to support the city's recently adopted Right to Counsel ordinance. There is currently $250,000 of ongoing funding budgeted for this program. Staff recommends $750,000 of annual budget in this program beginning in 2024 to ensure that renters will have access to legal representation in housing court. The city approved federal ARPA funding for this service in 2021 through 2023, which is why there is not a budget request for 2023. We still have ARPA funds to get us through that year. 53% of Minneapolis households are renters. This support will provide support for habitability repair, legal representation that has served 706 households between 2018 and 2021. It will support eviction defense that has served 578 households between 2018 and 2021. And it will support the Tenant Resource Center that has served 818 households between 2018 and 2021. CPED's newest division, the Planning Division, will be led by Meg McMahon, whose first day is today. In 2021, the City Council approved the creation of a new position in CPED, the Planning Director, to lead a newly reestablished Planning Division. This structure was in place 10 years ago. At that time, a long-range planning division was created in CPED that included about 15 planners, and the majority of planners and planning functions were folded into Development Services Division. Recreating the planning division will support CPED's current and future planning functions, including the implementation of Minneapolis 2040, and ensure that this work is centered on equity, especially racial equity, and is responsive to our climate emergency. This division will have 4 subdivisions: land use design and preservation, zoning administration, community planning, and code development. This division will continue to manage, review, and enforce land use, zoning, preservation, and environmental review applications. These services are currently housed in our Development Services Division, and the department staffs and administers public processes, including public meetings of the City Planning Commission, Heritage Preservation Commission, and the Zoning Board of Adjustment. The division will continue to perform administrative review and preservation permits received at the Customer Service Center and guide ongoing regulatory reform affecting land use development. This chart shows the number of items heard at the boards and commissions. In 2021, the city received 63 project proposals and 520 land use applications for site plan, conditional use permit, and variance approvals. There are 2 major rezoning studies focused on the Minneapolis 2040 implementation. The first rezoning study of built form took effect January 1 of 2021. The second one about land use is currently underway regarding regulating the scale of new development, and we expect to bring that forward in 2023. The only change item request for the planning division is an ongoing request of $216,000 to support the director position of this reconstituted division. This position will advance the implementation of Minneapolis 2040 comprehensive plan centered on racial equity and climate justice. This leader will also ensure the development and implementation of planning, urban design strategies, and community strategic development plans that will support equitable growth and development. This program administers and manages specific community planning and economic development financial resources, both with external partners and between CPED's funds. $25.3 million of CPED's proposed 2023 budget represents debt transfers, debt service and transfers to administer and manage specific CPED financial resources. These tax increment funds support a wide range of cities' development objectives and policy by prioritizing the production of affordable housing, increasing the city's tax base, remediation of contaminated land, and increasing the number of livable wage jobs. Additional change items proposed that are general to the department. They're related to staffing and span all of our programs. The first change item request is for $578,000 in ongoing funding to fund 5 out of the 6 positions that were frozen as part of the budget reduction strategy in 2020. Due to their critical functions, these frozen positions were reinstated with American Rescue Plan Act or ARPA limited term funding until and through 2023. These positions, housed in multiple CPED divisions, provide critical functions that support the implementation of city priorities of expanding housing options and economic recovery. This ongoing funding request of $131,000 for one position in 2023 and $622,000 for 3.75 positions in 2024 is to provide funding stability, again, to existing experienced staff that are delivering on city priorities of economic inclusion and affordable housing. The Development Fund, which is the current source of funding for these positions, is a sinking fund that currently supports staff, department operations, and multiple programs, including Great Streets and youth and adult workforce development. This fund is rapidly sinking and is likely to support one additional budget cycle. To continue to support our staff and successful implementation of our programs, alternative funding sources will have to be identified. CPED is in the process of working with the Budget Office and Development Finance to develop a sustainable plan. CPED received a cumulative total of $71.2 million of ARP funding in 2 phases for a total of 35 projects, $41.8 million for housing initiatives and $28.2 million for economic recovery. The housing and homeless ARPA funds allocation, as I mentioned, is $41.8 million, and this funds 20 projects. We are on track to commit all of the funds by the ARPA deadline of the end of 2024. This slide just highlights some of, as you can see, there's a lot of 20 different projects that were funded in the housing and homelessness area. This slide just highlights some of those highlights, including supporting NOAA preservation, continuing to build out and transform our homelessness response system, reducing racial disparities in homeownership through Minneapolis Homes program, creating new affordable rental housing. ARPA was used to create, for example, the MPHA scattered site deeply affordable family project, and also with the new missing middle permanent affordable public housing. The next 2 slides have the economic recovery, and CPED managed climate and public health investments provided by ARPA funding. Over the past year, the City Council has approved $26.9 million in economic recovery work and $1.3 million for Sabathani stabilization under the climate and public health strategy. CPED has been moving quickly to contract and spend these funds. Since the approval of ARPA Phase 1 a year ago, CPED has committed over $19 million of these funds in economic recovery and $760,000 of the Sabathani grant. We are on track to commit all of the funds by the ARPA deadline of the end of 24. ARPA work is supporting important communities and people. On this slide are some highlights. I'd like to highlight the Guaranteed Basic Income pilot, where the city started $500 monthly checks for 200 Minneapolis families in June. Of this initial cohort, around 74% of the recipients are Black, Indigenous people of color or Latino. Black people are the largest representation of recipients at 55% of the cohort. 7 out of 10 recipients are women. No recipient has an income of more than $50,000, and more than half have annual incomes under $20,000. So this funding will have an impact, a significant impact on these households. Another highlight is from Phase 2 of ARPA, with direct capital funding to 3 critical Native American-led organizations through the Clyde Bellecourt Indigenous Legacy Initiative. The city has already committed $1.5 million for the redevelopment of the Minneapolis American Indian Center and plan to bring a council action requesting $1 million in support for McGeezy later this year. The final project expected for council action next year is $1 million for the Indigenous Peoples Task Force project in the Phillips community. Altogether, ARPA is an important funding source in CPED's collective recovery work as we align these investments with our overall goal to reduce racial disparities in Minneapolis. This concludes my presentation. I want to thank all of you for your continued support of the work of CPED and our team. And I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Director. I also want to acknowledge that while we don't have a public hearing or comment period on today's agenda, I see we are joined by close to 24 CPED workers from the Building Inspectors Unit who are in the midst of their negotiations of their labor contract. I want you to know that we see you and hope we can visit separately for a deeper discussion. Thank you for joining us today in chambers as the city and building trades continue to meet to work on a fair and equitable agreement. So for that, I'd like to move on to questions from my colleagues. I see we have Councilmember Wansley here.
Thank you. Director Brennan, first question. Just clarification around the 23 vacancies a while ago that you began your presentation with. Are those concentrated heavily in one area? The reason why I'm asking is, I know in 2021, there was an effort to expand you all's policy program. And now that work is going to be done on the legislative side under government restructure, it would be helpful to know how many of those staff members spent most of their time currently working on policy, and to help us better understand, the role of those FTEs.
Sure. Madam Chair, Councilmember Wansley, thank you for the question. The 23 FTEs are distributed across, they're in all of the different divisions of CPED right now. And I think this is just like a report that's automatically generated. And so I think some of them literally have like people who have signed on and agreed, have accepted positions. And so it goes from that all the way to, job descriptions that are currently in the process of being rewritten and ready to get posted. I think and please let me know if I'm not understanding your question right, but I mentioned earlier that we have the Policy Research and Outreach team in the Administration and Services Division. And that group is a relatively small group. It includes one policy position as well as 3 economic or data analysts. And most of that work is focused on sort of, CPED type policies. Like, for example, what is CPED's, we have a disposition policy, we have equitable development policy. So it is focused less on legislation in the sense of like new ordinances, but more on sort of guiding policy for CPED to make sure that we're implementing our work in ways that align with council-approved goals. And but I think, to your point, there is that position has also worked on ordinance-type activities, like around renter protections and that type of activity. It's not a very deep bench that we have on policy work, but I do anticipate that there will be a discussion about what work departments continue to be involved in related to policy development and what work is in the legislative function.
And just a follow-up question on that, because I don't know if this is a relatively new change. I know there's other departments, for instance, with civil rights that just presented, they will provide recommendations for policy to council on the legislative side. Is this a relatively new thing that's implemented within CPED where there's not a dedicated staffer linked towards that legislative work? And from my understanding, it's through the legislative decision-making of this body that shapes, as of now, the CPED's kind of policy orientation. So why is that not happening?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Wansley, I think I understand your question to be Yes, this position and the work of this group does support policies that are considered by and adopted by the city council, for sure. So that is happening. And like, for example, this team is providing policy support, staffing support, and data support for the rent stabilization work group, for example. So that's basically the staffing capacity that we have at the city to support that work group. Am I understanding your question? Am I answering
I'll
your
come
question?
back. I know there's other folks in queue, but yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Now we have Councilmember Chugtai.
Thank you very much, Chair Koski. Director Brennan, I really, really appreciate your very thorough and detailed presentation. I think this might be the most detailed presentation I've seen so far this year, and just want to appreciate you for doing that. I know we are joined in the chambers today by a lot of protesters, and I always think it's a really good and sacred thing when people who are impacted by what we are discussing are here and bearing witness to what we're doing. So I really also care that we make sure that the thing they're here for gets addressed very explicitly to honor the sacrifices they made in spending so much time here with us today. So from my understanding, the folks joining us are here about the state of contract negotiations between the city and construction code services inspectors as it relates to wages and inflation. So I know that you personally and CPED leadership broadly does not lead contract negotiations in our city. That work lives with our labor relations team, which is a part of our human resources department. And ultimately, contracts, once they are agreed upon, are approved by this body, by the council. Hopefully, having level set the ability of this body and you and CPED to influence outcomes here today, I want to just talk a little bit about budget allocations for the Development Services Division, which is where these workers are. So in 2022, for this year, I see $7.6 million allocated for wages and salaries. In 2023, that allocation is just around $7.8 million, and in 2024, that's about $8 million. So I wonder if you can speak to how the 2023 and 2024 allocations account for potential settlements around wages with these workers and other workers in this division.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Chugtai, first of all, thank you for your kind words. And I apologize, I don't think I'm prepared to answer that question specifically about the wage negotiation piece. What I can, and I would look to the budget office or labor relations if there's anyone that is here to speak to that. And before you get up, Director Kruger, I wanted to call out here that one of the reasons why you see a decrease from 2022 to 2023 and then 2024 is the reconstituting of the planning division. The planning subdivision groups will move out of development services and into planning. So that's why that's the largest, I think, component of the numbers that you're seeing change here. But I'll let Director Kruger address the other question.
Thank you so much, Chair Koski and Councilmember Chugtai. Can you rephrase your question again, just so I can make sure I'm tracking what hasn't been answered?
Yep, for sure. So speaking specifically to the budget allocation for salaries and wages in the Development Services Division, which is where the folks who are here today are like, that's where their salaries are accounted for. In 2022, so for this year, $7.6 million are allocated for salaries and wages in this division. Next year, for 2023, that number moves up to 7.8 million, and then the following year, 2024, that moves up to 8 million. I see that as like a pretty steady increase. And I imagine if we went back a certain number of years or ahead a certain number of years, we'd see something pretty similar. But how does this allocation specifically for salaries and wages account for potential settlements around wages with these workers and other workers in this division?
Yes. Chair Koski and Councilmember Chung Tai, thank you for restating that. So all of the budgets for any employee in the city is how we fund those in the budget is dictated by our financial policies. And so typically the cost of personnel includes wages, it also includes fringe benefits, which things like health insurance, dental insurance, stuff like that. So speaking particularly about wages, we budget for the costs in the contracts that are signed, as well as any known increases. So typically when agreements are signed, they're multi-year. So we will pull in planned and known increases and budget for those accordingly. If there are unsigned contracts, then we typically take like a bit of a backwards look and look at how have we historically grown to make sure that we have some, we're planning the best we can, but not trying to predict something that has not been signed yet. So when we have a contract in hand, we're fully budgeting for it and funding it in the budget. When we don't have one, we're trying to anticipate as best we can. But of course, the actual salaries and wages will always be dictated by those agreements that are met and led, to your point, by the labor relations section in HR.
Wonderful. Thank you both. That answers my question.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. We now have Councilmember Wansley.
Thank you. So I know we're going to have a conversation in a couple of weeks, thanks to Councilmember Chavez and Council President Jenkins, around the strategic race and equity planning that's also part of, SREAP. And from my understanding, our Promise Zone kind of originated from that work several years ago. I'm interested to know, from my understanding, when SREAP first came into fruition, there was not operational dollars dedicated towards it. I think that's going to be a big component of our discussion on council, is in order to actually implement any type of meaningful work around race and equity, we're going to have to fund it. And as part of that, or extension of that, it's also the Promise Zones. You mentioned that there's only $36,000 that's going to be allocated towards, it sounds like, just leasing, which seems kind of insufficient for work that's dedicated towards the north side and supporting, a whole host of issues that residents are dealing with in that part of our city. Can you share if there's, why there's not a change proposal around including some more operational dollars, or if someone who works directly under the Promise Zone, if they can speak to literally what it sounds like there's really not money to do much outside of just be housed in a space.
Chair Koski, Councilmember Wansley, thank you for the question. It's a really good question. The Promise Zone actually started before, was a grant, a program, an initiative that the city applied for and received funding to support the creation of the Promise Zone. The $36,000 is just for the lease space to make sure that the Promise Zone staff, who include a director, and then oftentimes there's VISTA volunteers and interns and other folks that participate in participating in the work of the Promise Zone. It's important to be located in the community in which they're working, and so that's why the lease amount is proposed as a budget item. But like one of the examples in one of the proposed change items is the strategies for community safety, and that is the one-time funding request that I talked about earlier of $1 million to continue the pilot, and that is something that the Promise Zone would then administer. So that's like an example of funding that is going to that has already gone, and so the proposal is to continue this for another year to the Promise Zone to implement. The Promise Zone is also, the idea of the Promise Zone, and this is a federal designation is that the city will have priority for funding, for federal funding. So that's another area of opportunity for the Promise Zone, and to work with within CPED to try to see if there's other opportunities for fundraising there. Am I answering your question?
Not really. I say this also in light of, we do have workers here who are raising questions and are currently in negotiations about pay parity. You just mentioned for the Promise Zone, that division is operating on Vista labor, which, if anyone knows anything about the Vista program, those people are paid poverty wages, and they are not often a secure or source of labor for work that is like really crucial for elevating or addressing racial inequities, especially in North Minneapolis. So I'm interested to know why, one, I'm still not hearing, is there operational dollars allocated? And if not, why? And if there is a space where we can absorb actual secure funding for workers so that they can have the benefits that they need, instead of hoping that a federal grant will come at some point and be able to subsidize that work. I'm not hearing that we're doing that proactive work of funding it.
Chair Koski, Councilmember Wansley, thank you for that clarification. And that is correct. Most of the funding for Promise Zone is mostly in the form of supporting the operations of the staffing. But that's one of the things that I think we're really excited about having the Promise Zone join us in CPED, is to look for those opportunities that we can support that work and more fully integrate that work into the broader economic development and housing work that's happening in the department. And as it relates to the Strategic Racial Equity Action Plan, the way that, because the two of the three priority sort of action areas under the SREAP is in preventing involuntary displacement, particularly in the three highest zip codes where we have the highest eviction rates, and then also in supporting BIPOC businesses, BIPOC-owned businesses. And so we really see the SREAP goals and CPED as more of, yes, there are very specific initiatives under those SREAP goals, but it's also a lens through which we look at all of our programs and investments to the degree that all of our housing investments, for example, are contributing to preventing any kind of involuntary displacement, particularly for low-income and communities of color, and the same for our small business and our business supports, that we are supporting. Everything that we're doing is intended to support that SREAP goal of supporting BIPOC-owned businesses.
And just quickly too, you raised this of part of Promise Zone's budget is the administration of the community or strategies for community safety. Mm-hmm. Since we're undergoing government restructure, it actually sounds like something that should be placed in the Office of Violence Prevention or Neighborhood Safety. Why is it that we're having a division in CPED do administration or execution of community safety pilots or work when we're creating a whole new Office of Community Safety that seems to be charged with doing that, especially since we're creating this office with the goal of doing centralization? It sounds like by having that still in CPED, there is that fragmentation of community safety work that we're trying to move away from.
So I'm just going to jump in here quick. So I just want to make sure that our questions are related to this presentation that we had today with CPED here. So
I do want to know, Chair Koski, this is something that Director Brennan just raised, and this is in the presentation. Thank you.
Chair Koski, Councilmember Wansley, I think that's certainly a conversation that can be had. Increasingly throughout the enterprise, I think, we're finding in CPED for sure, like, there's no discrete disciplines anymore. I mean, there's so much, interconnectedness across the enterprise and in all of the work that we do. And like, for example, everything in CPED, there's a public safety component to everything. So I understand your question, and I think that's really ultimately a decision for the council to make. I will say one of the strengths of this work being led by the Promise Zone is really the relationships that have been created, and a big part of the Promise Zone focus is on livability, including community safety. And so I think that there's a lot of really strong and good community relationships that have been developed there. And yeah, I mean, maybe there's, I think that there are some roles and some functions in the city that you could probably argue could be in different places.
Thank you.
All right, now, next we have Councilmember Vita.
Thank you, Chair Koski. First, I want to acknowledge our workers here with us today. I just want to say that I see you and I stand with you. Thanks for joining us today. My first question is, I may have missed it, you may have talked about it, Director, but the Rise Up Center, who runs that? Can you give me a little bit more details about that?
Chair Koski, Councilmember Vita, thank you for asking a question when I had cheat notes to answer it. So Tending the Soil is the coalition of folks, and so the organizations in this coalition include Unidos Minnesota, New Justice Project, Minnesota Training Partnership, A-Wood Center, SEIU Local 26, Services, that's the Minnesota's Property Service Union, Unite Here, Local 17, which is the hospitality union representing hotels, restaurants, sports complexes, et cetera, and Building Dignity and Respect, which is developer of work-designed, worker-enforced code of conduct for new construction projects in the Twin Cities.
Okay. So this funding is going to support their efforts around workforce development, is what you said?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Wansley.
Thank you. So this is going back to some of the housing, affordable housing division work that you presented on. I'm seeing that there's a more substantial ask for the housing trust than what is being asked of us to fund specifically the public housing component at an ask of $2 or so million. Absolutely support the creation and preservation of public housing. I know there's about 17,000 people on the current wait list. Is there a reason why we're not investing more into public housing, since honestly, when you presented the slide that had the Met Council goals, and knowing that a great proportion of Minneapolis residents need housing that is at that 30% AMI level, public housing is already gravitated towards preserving and creating that. Why aren't we allocating more than just that initial request than some of the more allocations towards the housing trust and some of the Minneapolis homes? It seems like that could be an area where we could kind of feed two birds with one seed.
Mm-hmm. Chair Koski, Councilmember Wansley, you raise a really good and interesting point. I think the backlog of maintenance needs on public housing units is over $170 million, so the need is certainly there for more funding. The rationale behind this budget ask is for 2023, and partially there's not an ask for 2024, and the reason is because MPHA is in the process of refreshing or updating their strategic plan, and their strategic plan will ideally set the priorities of the specific projects and priorities that they have going forward in the next couple of years. So our expectation is that there could be a conversation for the 2024 budget year of potential funding partnerships between the city and MPHA that could support the strategic goals that MPHA is establishing. For right now, and also wanted to also highlight again, while $3.7 million is being requested as part of this budget process, when the city has had additional funding available, like for example, staff brought forward a request to all of you and you approved repurposing $1.15 million of our CDBG funding to help contribute to a fire suppression system in multiple high-rises that MPHA owns and operates. With the ARP funding that came to the city, this body approved significant funding, $5.8 million, for the redevelopment of 84 of those scattered site units. So turning, I think to your point, Councilmember Wansley, like turning, I think it's 16 single-family homes into 84 units that will provide deep affordability to extremely low-income families in areas throughout the city. We are, again, looking at the strategic planning process that MPHA is going through right now. One of the things they're going to be looking at is like the remaining 700 scattered site units that they have. What is the plan for those? Is the plan to rehabilitate all of them? Is the plan to identify more of those 700 units that could then, be, could 100 of them, for example, under MPHA's current strategic plan, they identify that 100 of those single-family homes could be used, to create duplexes or triplexes, or I think at the time the plan was adopted, the city was contemplating fourplexes. So that is the sort of planning that's happening at MPHA that we want to wait to see what comes out of that and make recommendations to all of you to support that.
It's funny that you share that, and would love to maybe facilitate a meeting between MPHA, probably you and some other folks at CPED, other council members, because maybe other council members also had a presentation from MPHA. Our office did a couple of weeks ago. They named very explicitly that the strategic plan is not a barrier for us in moving forward with allocation for 2023 and 2024. They actually said if that point was raised, that we should maybe push back on that, because there has been an ask of the city for allocation, as you mentioned, to go towards that substantial backlog for 2023 and 2024. So we'd love for all of us to get kind of on the same page of, it's very clear they need this money. So far, the city has moved project to project when you mentioned the scattered sites. While that's great, they need something more substantial, and that 2-year investment will actually help a lot more. And the strategic plan doesn't overshadow that. They've provided, I hope to the rest of my colleagues and probably you, a substantial 10+ year plan of what is needed. So it sounds like the strategic plan, while you're taking that into consideration, I was told explicitly that's not a barrier, and that we should be looking as a council to make those massive investments. And that's why I asked that question of, here's the opportunity to do so. And I hope that there is still that opening to do so, and knowing that the strategic plan is not necessarily that obstacle needed for us to do this major investment in public housing that thousands of residents need right now.
And now next we have Councilmember Vita.
Thank you, Chair Koski. My question is about the home ownership fund, which is $494,000 you have in here. Is this the complete fund amount, or is this in addition to some already existing funds?
Yes, Chair Koski, Councilmember Vita, thanks for that question. It would be in addition to the $196,000 of base funding. So I think we get up to $600,000 of annual funding, and this is for the down payment assistance program, the $10,000 per year. This request is a budget neutral request. Currently, that amount of funding that we're asking for, just under $500,000, is currently budgeted in an ongoing budget to the higher density housing corridor program. Which is what we use to acquire parcels for multifamily development in the future. And we have a sufficient balance in that fund right now that we don't need additional funds for 2023 and 2024. So we're just asking for those funds to be reprogrammed from the higher density corridor program to the down payment assistance program. And the reason is because right now, the almost $500,000 is coming out of that development fund that I mentioned earlier that is rapidly shrinking. So the idea is that we want to come up with a more sustainable funding source for the down payment assistance program, because we have found that is a critical investment that we need to make to be able to support, potential home buyers who don't have the ability to have a down payment.
And so is this money, all monies that is going to down payment assistance, or does this include like staffing in this department?
The full amount, I believe, is for down payment assistance. Oh, I'm sorry. It's for down payment assistance, and also there is some administrative costs that the down payment assistance providers charge. So there's Build Wealth Minneapolis, for example, or Build Wealth Minnesota, is a nonprofit that they provide both homeownership readiness services as well as down payment assistance. And so they charge there's partly an administrative fee that they charge.
Thank you, Elfrick, and thank you, Director.
Thank you. I just want to note for my colleagues, we have about 20 minutes left here, and there are 6 of us left in queue. We'll get through as many as we can. So, Councilmember Rainville.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Brennan. But before I ask my question, I also want to thank Dan McConnell and our union sisters and brothers for your polite and respectful presence here today. It's greatly appreciated, the manners that you're showing, so thank you. Director Brennan, I believe it was program number 4 you talked about the $2.7 million for the MPHA. What type of help do we get from the federal and state governments?
Chair Koski, Councilmember Rainville, MPHA gets a direct allocation of funding from the federal government. So the idea of public housing is that the Congress would appropriate sufficient funding to meet both the operating requirements as well as the capital needs. Unfortunately, for decades now, Congress has failed to appropriate sufficient funds to keep up with the improvements that are needed at public housing. During the Obama administration, came up with a new set of sort of tools that would allow public housing authorities to leverage their assets and raise private capital to try to address some of the repairs that are needed there. That is something that MPHA has done. They have used some of those new tools that HUD has provided to raise private capital to fund the preservation and rehabilitation of their units. Additionally, the state does have some called a Public Housing Opportunity Program. It's an annual competitive basis. It's a really small amount of funding. MPHA does apply for state funding and has been successful in getting some state funding. I believe the county has provided some financial support for MPHA for project-specific type work, such as the 84-unit family scattered site project. The city of Minneapolis, we don't receive any direct funding from the state or federal government we don't receive direct funding that is intended to support MPHA. So most of the funds that we have allocated to MPHA in the past have been funds that could really go for any of our housing and economic development type activities.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right, Councilmember Wansey.
Yeah, so this question is around kind of staffing capacity. Just this spring around ARPA, I was really proud to have worked with several of my colleagues to move about $7,000 or $700,000 towards the business technical assistance program, specifically in the cultural corridors. I also know, our office wanted to see way more in the $5 million area of investments in that. But during discussions around that amendment, we were told, from CPED that there was not staffing capacity to handle additional funding. So I would like to know kind of in the landscape with some of these proposals in front of us around, support for additional programs. In your ideal world, kind of what would full staffing for the small business team look like?
Sure. Chair Koski, Councilmember Wansley, thank you for that question, and really appreciate it. I know you're going out with our small business team soon to do some door knocking, so really appreciate your support for that work. I'm going to ask Director Eric Hansen to come up and speak more specifically to our implementation of ARPA funding for our business supports.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Councilmember Wansley, my name is Eric Hansen. I'm the Economic Development Director. The staff capacity we discussed earlier in the year is more of the community-based organizations that we're working with and where they're hitting a maximum. And so as they start to find potentially more folks to work for them, then they could probably serve more businesses. The challenge, though, is this is one-time funding, and so most of those community-based organizations won't make those staffing decisions to staff up because then they'll have to, cut staff after the funding goes away. So that's why we talked about the 700,000. As far as like what would full capacity, the change items you see in economic policy and development can be handled through the existing staff. We will have some attrition. That's just natural. We have a couple of open positions that we are trying to hire to keep that moving. It is an enormous amount of work for the soon-to-be five subgroups of the division, and I'll acknowledge that we have a staff team that is pretty fatigued over the last few years. It's been a real excruciatingly intense ride to help with the recovery work. And so this stuff is important for us. The city is doing really important work to address not only the racial disparities we see in wealth building and economic opportunity, but also recovering from the pandemic and the unrest. And we'll continue that work. And these change items we think are going to help with that. But it's going to be a challenge for us to get it all done.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next, we have Councilmember Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, workers, for joining us today. This is actually building on Councilmember Wansley's question around BTAP. I'm most familiar with BTAP, but I'm learning more about DTAP, and then I remembered hearing about CTAP, and then even the idea of ATAP for arts. And so my overall question is, across a number of these technical assistance programs, it seems that we're allocating budget according to each, or is this a lump allocation for technical assistance that your team is using discretion, looking at our staff capacity, our partner capacity? How is that funding allocated? And I was also specifically curious about ATAP because I remember hearing about that years ago.
Chair Koski, Councilmember Payne, thank you for the question. I'm going to ask Eric to come back up again. He's more familiar with the RFP cycles.
All right. Madam Chair, Councilmember Payne, we'll talk about it in the technical assistance programs, and then we have direct allocations for each of the letters. Again, to your point, we're trying to get all 26 if we can get there. The developer technical assistance program has been expanded. This is the first year we've gotten back to the cohort model, but we've noticed through the Commercial Property Development Fund that some emerging entrepreneurial developers are having difficulty getting through the development process. So we expanded that program to provide one-on-one technical assistance with experienced real estate developers to get them through the process, and we've seen some some accomplishments through that program. The CTAP program was expanded to help with the costs of creating a co-op. So we have a cohort program for that as well, but now if you're converting from an existing business into a co-op, the city can help provide for that financial burden to get you into the CTAP. We just started that back up again after the pandemic, and so we have not seen that bear fruit yet, but we're still working on that. And then the ATAP is in the Office of Arts and Culture, and I'm not really familiar with all of the specifics about that. It's a smaller program that provides technical assistance for artists and arts-based entrepreneurs. So that would be something we'd have to take up with Gilgoon. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next we have Councilmember Chugtai.
Thank you, Chair Koski. Director Brennan, I want to talk about change item number 7 regarding the renter eviction representation, which is on page 33 of your slide deck, which is asking for $500,000 in ongoing funding starting in 2024 for eviction representation. And that this program is currently funded at $250,000 per year, and then starting 2024, that would go up to $750,000 per year. Very exciting. I saw data shared, I think back in early August by Commissioner Angela Conley, who co-chairs Heading Home Hennepin. I know you're talking about that during your budget presentation earlier. That essentially was sharing the rapid increase in eviction filings following the end of the eviction moratorium. So something between like May of 2022 and June of 2022, we saw eviction filings double across the county. And of course, the city of Minneapolis accounts for a small portion of the full county, but generally speaking, that is pretty good data to look to. And so, I saw that, and I see this this change item, and I'm wondering if you can speak to the gap between when we increase the amount of money that the city allocates for eviction representation, when we see such a rapid increase right now, and is that existing $250,000 enough to meet such a rapid increase in need in this area?
Chair Koski, Councilmember Chugtai, thank you for that question and all of the context. You're exactly right. After the end of the eviction moratorium and the end of the emergency rental assistance this summer, we have seen a pretty significant uptick in evictions that are filed in the city, in the county. And your question is a really good one because it is a little bit of a moving target because we haven't exactly been in like sort of normal times. And so, there was the eviction moratorium and then all the emergency assistance and then now those are both ending. And we've also, the landscape has shifted a little bit. Hennepin County has now provided support for in-house attorneys who are also representing people at housing court. So they have brought pretty significant additional capacity to provide this, to really meet this like right to counsel and making sure that anybody who goes to housing court has access to legal representation, because we know that the outcomes are significantly better if there is legal representation. So with the county stepping into the space and providing more capacity there, we've also worked really closely with Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid to try to estimate the need and also do that in a way that can ramp up and get us where we need to go that's sustainable over time. So it's a bit of a moving target. Our best estimate right now is that for the city's part of this, that $750,000 is our best estimate of what would be sufficient to provide legal representation to people at housing court. Now, that could change, and we'll have to track this very closely. And if it appears that that's not sufficient, then we're going to be tracking that very closely, and we'll certainly make sure that we are alerting policymakers to that situation if it happens.
And in the absence of, or in that gap time between, now and 2024, when this funding will increase, are you guys, or are you and CPED having conversations about, like increasing or adding new rental assistance while, no one else is doing that work right now?
Sure. Chair Koski, Councilmember Chugtai. So the reason why there's a gap between now and 2024 is because we did allocate over over $1 million of ARP funding. So that $750,000 per year is the level we're going to be funding this at in 2023, based on allocations that you've already made. And so it's where we're going to run out of those funds in 2023. And so that's why we need this $500,000 starting in 2024, because that's when we're going to see a gap in service levels if we don't increase or find substitute funding for the federal funds. There have been opportunities to apply for additional federal emergency housing assistance. We have applied for those funds in partnership with Hennepin County. And I don't believe we've heard yet. Yeah, we haven't yet heard if we're receiving an allocation of funds, but we are certainly going after those funding opportunities as they become available.
Thank you very much.
And our final question here is from Councilmember Wansley.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to my first question earlier about just policy, I try to reword it in a way to try to get to where I think I was going. So do you envision CPED elevating its policy work, either, policy that's initiated through council, the legislative side, and based off of majority of my colleagues voting under government restructure to give the mayor or executive the authority to also provide policy proposals? We're anticipating policy recommendations through that side as well. But do you essentially see a space in dedicating staff to advance that, and knowing that we, as you mentioned, have rent control under works? TOPA has been on pause indefinitely, and knowing that that's council-initiated policy that it has not come back to us. And I would love to hear, again, like other departments have come forward with other policy proposals, other substantial policies. Again, Council Member Chuck Ty just raised around just some of the evictions. We literally have action outside of City Hall right now with unhoused neighbors in response to the mass displacement of hundreds of unhoused people just last Wednesday in one day. Any type of policy work around evictions and encampments. So I just want to see if we're thinking of actually seriously funding that policy work within CPED. I hear a lot of allocations about the services that we're doing, but not necessarily that proactive, like how we're getting at the structural issues that drive many of these social services to be in existence in the first place.
Sure. Chair Koski, Councilmember Wansley, thank you for that, that question and all of that context too. What I can say is that we, again, our policy function is really small in CPED. It's really one policy person, and then we have a manager of that unit that also lends some support to policy development. But we have certainly been, the last couple of years, very proactive in working with the City Council on very specific policies. So, I mean, even, the right to counsel ordinance, a lot of the policies that have come forward, especially around tenant protections, we've worked really closely with council member policymakers on developing and bringing those forward. What that looks like under the new government structure, I think is, what I envision is that we'll still need subject matter expertise to participate in this policy making. And I look forward to lending that capacity to policies that are being developed by our legislative body, all of you. And I mean, we have played a significant role in the past, and I would expect that would continue. Right now, a lot of the capacity in that policy function is really focused on supporting the rent stabilization work group. So that is where a lot of the focus is right now. And as that moves forward, we certainly are happy to look at other policy work that needs to get done and that this body identifies as priorities.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Director Brennan, for being here today. Thank you to the CPED team for joining us, and welcome Meg McMahon to the city of Minneapolis. So thank you for joining us today. I also just want to acknowledge that Councilmember Ellison had joined us briefly, and I know had to step out again, but just want to acknowledge that for the record. So seeing no further discussion at this point, I'll direct the clerk to file those presentations. Our next budget committee meeting is scheduled, you can go ahead and sit down if you'd like. Our next budget committee meeting is scheduled for Thursday, October 13th at 10 a.m. That day, we are set to hear from the Convention Center, Finance and Property Services, and the Health Department. With that, we've concluded all business to come before the committee today, and without objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned.